and welcome back to another amazing episode of Becoming the Light from the Shadows of Abuse, the podcast where we explore the stories of women who have had trauma and abuse in their past. And so often we're led to believe, for whatever reason, that it damages you for life, that you can't recover, you can't go on to be successful. And here we like to tell the stories of women who've done just that. So today my guest is Jaz Rawlinson. I know she's got an incredible story to tell us. She's a mental health speaker and a writing coach. So those two things together, everything she does is based on her own experience, like so many of us. As always, she knows herself so much better than I do. So I'm going to hand over to her so that she can introduce herself to you properly. And then as we go back and explore her story, you already know where she is in her life and you can see what she's overcome and where she's got to. So, good morning, Jaz.
Good morning, and thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Sarah.
So, yeah, thank you for being here. And for anyone who's just listening, not watching, I couldn't help but commenting when Jaz came on. She has this amazing, brilliant blue hair. It is truly stunning. It's really incredible. So if you get a chance to look rather than just listen, it's well worth it just to see her beautiful hair. It's amazing. So, okay, beauty on the inside and beauty on the outside. They go together. So, Jaz, let me hand over to you so that you can just tell us about where you are at the moment, what you're doing in your life. And then, as always, we'll go back and have a look at where you've come from and what's influenced you to get where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am an Australian mental health speaker, a writing coach, and best-selling author. I'm based in Brisbane, so quite a beautiful place. Beautiful part of the world to live. And yeah, I'm not sure what else you want me to share. I'm sure we'll get into a lot more throughout the podcast, but yeah, that's just a little bit about myself and where I'm based.
I love that you're speaking on mental health. Obviously, as you know, it's my absolute passion, because trauma and abuse obviously affects people's mental health. And most of the mental health issues that we come across, even when we start to dig deeper, we don't have to look far because they are in, most cases related to some kind of abuse. The way that someone has been made to feel about themselves, of some kind of control or pressure that they're under. You would know that. So I love that. It needs more of us. It needs more of us to be speaking out about mental health for sure, because approaches and understanding need to change, as you know, hugely. We're way off course with what we're doing with mental health, but then your writing, I think your writing is very specific, isn't it? So what is it that you help people to write about?
Yeah, so my work is all about pretty much about the transformative and healing power of storytelling. So I actually started off my career years ago doing marketing, copywriting, and I was an assistant magazine editor for a little while. But I found that I was really drawn to storytelling and to just real and honest stories. And so the stories that always gripped me were the ones of people who had overcome adversity and had gone through trauma and gone on to, discover more about who they were and how they could actually use their past adversities to create better futures, not just for themselves and their families, but for their communities and people across the world, and things like that as well. So it's always been a real fascination of mine. I've always been, even when I would read books, I'd always be drawn to the memoirs and the autobiographies because I just really loved those real stories.
I'm the same. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love biographies, autobiographies in particular. I can totally relate to that. So that's what you encourage people to do, to help them to heal by telling their story.
Yeah, so my work is all about empowering people to own their story and to use those stories to change lives, grow their business at the same time. If they're, for example, if they're a speaker or an entrepreneur, or if they're an everyday person, just how to, I coach them through the process of how to get their story out of their head and into a published book that can then change lives, impact people around the world, and really help them feel that everything they've been through, there's been a reason for it. So, there's meaning that's come from all of the hardships that they've been through, because they're able to see their story out there, touching lives and helping other people who maybe are walking the same journey that they once walked.
Yeah, and I understand the power of it myself, because it's nearly 2 years ago since my own book was published, and I remember about 6 months before it. The book was published in the October. I think I started to dissect it in the February, because I literally, I can explain it as I got to the point where it was taking up too much space within me. I just felt as if I was just full with this story, and I just had to get it out. And I remember by the April, having gone through the process of, just as you said, there's a process of getting down, not writing the book, that took a few months longer, but of actually just getting down the information, and the relief of getting it, the structure and the basic information. And it was like this enormous weight that was lifted, and it just created space within me. It was a real joy to actually release that whole story, because people knew bits of it, but to release the whole thing,
Absolutely.
it is very, very powerful and extremely healing. So yeah, I can relate to that for sure. So now, talking about healing, obviously the work you do is related to your own experiences. So take us back and tell us what it was that you've been through, that you had to heal from, that led you into the writing, the coaching and speaking that you do.
Yeah, well, it's been a very long journey to get to where I
It
am.
always is.
Always is, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, growing up, so I grew up in, so probably know the mid north coast of New South Wales, so around the Coffs Harbour area. It's kind of wedged in between Sydney and Brisbane. So I did grow up in a really beautiful part of the world, and so in a lot of ways, I'm always very honest about the fact that I was very blessed to grow up in a really beautiful area and quite a very safe area. I grew up in the bush in the end of a tiny little valley, and so I had a lot of privileges that a lot of kids, don't get. I had my own horse. I could go up into the mountains and go exploring and know that I'd be safe. I went to a good school. And, if you had asked any of my friends back then, they probably would have said that things looked pretty good in my life. I looked like I had a really great life and everything was really perfect. But nobody knew that behind closed doors things were very, very different. And with that, beautiful little valley that we lived in, and the solitude that we had there was also the isolation of living with family violence and not really having anyone to talk to about that. So
that
from
that
the
just
age of oh, sorry, I'll let you go.
No, I was going to say that just beautifully highlights already one of the problems that so many people face. And the reason people don't speak out is, number one, as children, they don't have anyone to speak out to. But even as adults, if you're the adult being abused, on the surface, everything looks different. So there's always the fear that people won't believe you, they won't understand, they have no concept, because we shape our thoughts and our opinions about what someone's life is like by what we see. Of course, and even as you were talking about your childhood, I imagine there are very many people who could make a snap decision and say, well, what on earth did you have to complain about?
Yeah.
So it just beautifully illustrates that point. And I'm sure there are many people listening in that situation who are scared to speak out about what's happening to them, because either they really don't have anyone to tell, or because everything looks so different that they are afraid that they won't be believed.
Hmm.
I can relate to this firsthand because I remember when I first started speaking about my narcissistic marriage, because on the surface it all looked so different, and because my husband was very different with other people, and when other people were around, there was a real backlash against me for daring to suggest that he was that way.
Mm.
So anyone who's scared about that, yeah, I've been there. I completely understand. Yeah, so it's very real. This is why people hide the abuse. And I always say there would be less abuse if we could all tell our stories as we went along. Instead of hiding and
Yeah, absolutely.
creating this facade. So yeah, so thank you for bringing up that point. Yeah, so you're in this seemingly idyllic childhood, but behind the scenes there's domestic violence, which
Mm.
is terrifying. People forget that it's
Well,
terrifying for
yeah.
children.
And that's why my heart really goes out to all the kids around the world at the moment who are stuck inside in abusive families during what's
Oh,
happening around the
yeah.
world. And, they're in lockdown and they're stuck inside with an abusive person or an abusive parent or family member. And I know how, I can only imagine how much worse it would have been for me and for my mum back then if I hadn't been able to go to school, if I was stuck at home and homeschooling and my dad was working from home and my mum was working from home, it just would have been even worse.
Yeah.
I mean, in that situation back then, I was 10 years old when my depression started and when I started to have severe anxiety and chronic depression. And of course, I didn't know what it was because we had no conversations back then around mental health or around family violence. It's not like you'd turn on the TV like today and see an ad for Beyond Blue or an ad for 1-800-RESPECT or anything like that. You just wouldn't see that. And so it was really isolating, and I didn't even know how to describe to my friends what was actually happening in our house. So I just had to live through that alone with no one to really talk to about it other than my mum for a very long time. And until, and that continued, and my mental health issues got worse and worse. And it ended up at the point where by the time I was 18, I was feeling like I had no direction in life. I just finished school. My only goal was to get out of the house and get away from my dad. And I sort of didn't know how that was going to happen. And then it was only a couple months after I finished school that my dad actually suicided. So that was a whole other level of trauma as well.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, and people don't often talk about what it's like when the family member who suicides is actually the abusive family member. So there's grief and there's trauma and there's relief, all mixed up into the equation, and then that creates more guilt because you don't want to tell anyone that you actually feel relief
Relief.
that that abusive person is no longer around. Um,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
can only sort of talk about the fact that it's a traumatic experience and that you wish your parent had never done that, but you can't talk about the other parts of the relief or the abuse, and everything from having to go to the funeral and see people saying nice things about my dad and having people come up and say, I'm really, really sorry for your loss and you must be devastated. All of that just created even more trauma. And so to cut a long story short, I went out into the world after school very emotionally damaged, no ability to recognize how to set healthy boundaries, no idea how to cultivate a healthy relationship. And that led me into a friendship and sort of a relationship with a guy. We were friends for 2 years, sort of dated a little bit. Um, and after 2 years of him sort of grooming me and making me feel that I could really trust him and that he cared about me, he actually sexually assaulted me. And so I was 20, almost 21 by that stage. And that was my rock bottom moment, because I just felt like I was done with life at that point. I didn't understand what my life could possibly offer me other than trauma, constant constant disappointment. And I had to sort of come out of that rock bottom moment and make a decision that, even though I didn't know what life was going to be like or where that light at the end of the tunnel was, I made a decision that I was going to just start trying to make better decisions around who I hung out with, trying to listen to my gut instinct instead of ignoring it. And just try to make some different decisions and choices to the ones I had been making for the last few years, and see if that led me into, some sort of better relationships and friendships and situations. So it was a really awful kind of decade from age 10 to age 20, I would say.
A couple of amazing points that you made there. Firstly, I want to point out there's the decision. Everyone who comes on this podcast without any prompting from me reveals the point where they made the decision. And it's so important, because anyone who says, how on earth do I get over this? How do I change my life? And I always say it starts with a decision. And without fail, anyone who has ever done this kind of healing, been on this personal journey, reveals that they made that decision. Because when you make the decision, you let go of blaming other people. Not that they weren't to blame, but when you get stuck in that blame, you can't move forward. It's
Oh,
when you make that decision.
I was stuck in that victim mentality. Everything was about, everything was about, this person did this wrong by me, and why do these bad things always happen to me, and why does nothing ever work out for me? Everything I try to do fails. I'm obviously just not meant to, do this thing. I'm obviously too stupid to do this thing. Everything was, I was just stuck in victim mode. And I don't think I ever made a conscious decision around that to get out of it, because I didn't know how. But I did make that conscious decision that I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm sick of attracting these guys who, go on to either emotionally or sexually or physically,
Abuse,
abuse me. I'm sick of attracting these people and these situations, and I don't know why, but that seems to be all I attract. I'm just always getting into these unhealthy relationships with guys. And I had to make that decision that I don't want to go there anymore. And it was actually only a couple of months after that that I went into what ended up being a 3.5 year incredibly healing relationship with a guy who I we were within the same sort of friendship circles, and I think I dated someone who was a friend of his, who again was a jerk of a person. But through that, I started to date this guy, and I really had to. All of the trauma and the mistrust issues were still there. I didn't trust him. I thought he was going to do the same things as the other guys, and I really put it on him to prove himself. And I think that was the beginning of me making, those active decisions and working out sort of how to create boundaries and get myself out of these unhealthy relationships, was to start saying, well, I'm just going to put things out there and see how he responds. I'm going to tell him that I don't like it if he calls me that. He was never abusive in any way, but I just remember there's a story I remember where I think we were walking on the beach one day, and we were just joking around with each other, and he said something flippantly like, "Oh, yeah, right, you loser," just a jokey comment. And I just stopped, and my gut, it felt like I'd been punched in the gut, because all I could think about was the way that my dad used to speak to me. And then I had this little voice in my head going, "Don't say anything about it. He's going to think that you're overly emotional. He's going to think that you're a stupid, um, a stupid young woman that just makes a big deal out of nothing. Just be the cool girl. Just go along with it." And I made that decision to just say to him, just gently, "Hey, I know you're only joking just then, but can you not use words like that around me? Because it reminds me of the way my dad used to talk to me. And I know it sounds silly, but it actually makes me feel really awful." And he just went, "Whoa, I'm so sorry. Like I didn't mean that at all. And yeah, I won't use that word around you again." And the fact that he listened and empathized and was like, "Yep, absolutely, I'll take that on board." And the fact that, he continued throughout our relationship to always show up when he said he would, he never stood me up. He was always respectful of my feelings. That helps me to rebuild my trust over time, and helped me to go on to become, the sort of person who was able to go into healthy relationships in the future. And, I'm married now. My husband and I have a son together, and I don't know that I ever would have been able to go into a healthy relationship and get married and be where I am today if I hadn't been in that relationship, but also if I hadn't made those small steps to start standing up for myself. So that's a
Right.
really important thing that I always want survivors of violence or sexual assault or domestic violence especially to know, is that they are small steps, but you have to start by listening to your gut and speaking up when you feel within your whole body that something is not right. Don't listen to those voices that say this is stupid, they'll probably make fun of you. If somebody is treating you in a certain way or saying certain things that, remind you of triggers, or they don't make you feel good, you need to start speaking up and speaking those feelings, because that's the only way that you're ever going to move forward to a place where you can function in a healthy relationship. So
Yeah, and that is such a beautiful story, because it illustrates what happens when you stand up for what is right for you. It's never for anyone else to tell you that your boundaries are ridiculous or your expectations are too high, or because they're too high for them, but they are yours.
mm,
And people often, I know people have the fear, like you did, that, oh, if I say this, they're going to say this, it doesn't matter. If they do that, then what you're saying is, this person can't, if I think this person is going to react in this way, this person can't actually meet my needs. They
mm.
can't be what I need in my life. So if they do react like that, and you have to let them leave your life, or you decide you no longer want them in your life, then that's a really good positive thing, because
Yep.
what it's shown you is what you don't want in your life. We get so afraid of hanging on to what we don't want. What you're saying is, this person is going to respond in a way that I don't like, so I'm not going to say what I need to say, because I'm terrified that this person that isn't right for me will
Mm.
then not want to be in my life. It's a very
And Sarah,
mixed
I
up
think it's also a
perspective.
problem that so many women seem to struggle with, that they have so much trouble speaking up for what they actually want or how they actually feel, because they're so worried about upsetting the other person or offending
Yes.
the other person. And that's who I was for most of my life. I never wanted to hurt anyone's feelings, and if that meant that my feelings or my personal boundaries got eroded in the process, then that was what was going to happen, because I just never wanted to upset anyone or hurt anyone's feelings. And people, yeah, I think a lot of women struggle with this in particular. So,
Well, and of course, just like you, it comes from the same place. Children in an abusive childhood are taught that they have no value, they have no worth. And obviously, as a survival mechanism, they make themselves as small as they can. They
yeah.
speak up as little, they need as little, they're heard as little. They try to take up as little space as possible just to survive.
Mm,
So, but
absolutely.
yeah, as you said, you need to start to express yourself, to express your needs, and to know that it's your right, and the right people will meet your needs and stay in your life. Your job is not to be nice to everyone. Your job is to be totally congruous and open and honest and authentic about who you are and what you need. And then, just like you illustrated with that story, what you feared didn't happen. And so it showed you that you were with the right person. But
Mm,
if he had then called you out and said, oh, you are all those things, everything about you would have, because your intuition was so strong, everything about you would have said, well, I don't need to spend any more time with this person if he can't respect my wishes,
mm,
can't respect my boundary. And this is how we go through the process of sorting out all the toxic people in our lives. And when we show up like you did in this very sincere and honest and open way, it's like a magnet to the right people. The right people gravitate to us. And that is such a beautiful story that you share. And just, I think it just illustrates so much of what so many people need to understand and need to hear, that your values, your needs, your wants are important, and suppressing them for the sake of others just leads to you having the wrong people in your life, and to denying what's right and what's important to you. I think it's, yeah, that's such a valuable lesson there. I did want to go back on something actually that came up earlier. I made a note of it, and because you were talking about having no one to speak to about it but your mum. What was that like for you, speaking to your mum about what was happening to her, how it was affecting you? Did she have any thoughts of leaving or protecting you, or because there's going to be a lot of people listening who are in this situation where they just wish their mum would leave the abuser.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I want to say first off the bat that for anyone who is listening and is in this situation, um, research shows that it takes an average of 7 times for a woman to successfully and safely leave. I say women, because it's predominantly, women who we know that women experience domestic violence at increased rates, but that's not to say that men and children don't as well, because they absolutely do. But the research just in terms of women has shown that it's generally 7 times on average to safely leave. So it can be really hard for people to understand why their loved ones or their family members keep returning to these relationships. Um, but it's so hard when you don't have anywhere else to go. So for us, I used to ask my mum all the time, why can't we just go? It was such a simple question for a child.
Mm,
Why can't we just go? And when I look back now, I think, well, where would we have gone? I don't even know of any shelters in the area that we grew up back then. I don't even know if there were any. There was certainly no awareness or any ads on TV about where you would go or who you would call, other than to call the police. And my mum she was looking after 2 kids. I was the eldest of 2 kids, and when you have 2 young children to provide for and you are working casual work, my mum was struggling in a small town to get work and in her profession. She'd been in her profession for decades, and yet it took her about a decade to get a permanent contract in her job, and that was not until I think after my dad's death. So when I look back at that time, she was working casual work, trying to support two kids. A lot of the time she was actually the breadwinner in the family, and we only had one car. And a lot of the time my dad would do very controlling things to make sure that we only went out when he wanted us to, or he knew exactly where we were. There were times that mum would want to go to, an aerobics class or into the shops to get food, and he would drive us in there, drop us off, and then we would sit there for maybe 2 hours and wait for him to pick us up, just however long he wanted to make us wait. There was always a way just to show that, he was the one in control. And that's what he wanted us to know. And so, when I think about that question, first of all, we didn't really have anywhere to go. Secondly, she had 2 children to support and, school fees to pay and all of these things. And even when we did find somewhere to go, which didn't happen until I was 17, we were very, very blessed that someone in mum's church had a series of rental properties, and they were in the middle of developing these properties. And there was a little house that was in amongst a banana plantation, and it was basically right next to a main highway, but it was tucked away inside this banana plantation and hidden. And they offered that house to our family for 6 months. And I just think back now, like, wow, that's huge to offer a property that you are supposed to be developing and give it away to somebody rent-free for 6 months is just huge. And it was amazing because it gave me some space to breathe, and it obviously gave my mum some space to breathe and feel safe. And while we were always worried that Dad would find us, and he did eventually, and that was very, very anxiety producing about how that was gonna play out. For the most part, we were very safe while we were there, and I was able to, for the first time in my teenage years, actually feel like a carefree teenager and have friends over and not have to worry about how my dad was going to react, or about walking on eggshells all the time, or what he was going to scream abuse at us for this time. And so that was we were very blessed to have that. But at the end of that 6 months, we went back, and I want to share this because it's so important, because a lot of the times people do go back to their abuser and family members or loved ones don't understand why. For us, we no longer had that place to live in, so we had to make a decision where we were going to go next. And just like many abusers, my dad was by that time saying all the right things, doing all the right things. He was showing that he had changed, and it seemed like it made sense to my mum to go home. Unfortunately, like most cases of domestic and family violence, the violence began again within weeks to months of moving home. And it continued that way through until my dad's death, which was in the next year, I think next year and a half. So yeah, it's really hard for loved ones to understand, but there are so many factors as to why people stay. And the most important thing you can do is try to be a safe space and a welcoming ear, and a source of encouragement for that person when they do come to you and open up that they're going through abuse. It's in our nature as humans to want to fix things straight away, to just want to rescue people out of those situations, but we can't always do that. And the best thing we can do is listen to someone and listen to what they're going through. Be that empathetic ear so that person, just like if I'd had that, someone to just listen and feel that I wasn't so alone, I know that it would have lessened the burden a bit. I know that my mum did have good friends who were aware of some of the issues happening in our home, and obviously, like the person who gave us the property to stay on, and that I'm sure that was hugely helpful to my mum, just to have someone that understood and validated what she was experiencing, and didn't tell her that it was nothing, didn't tell her to go home to her husband and be a good Christian wife, and all of those things. So it's important to listen to the person, so that hopefully in time they feel that they do have enough people around them that they trust and who support them, that they're able to start putting the steps in place to safely leave. Because leaving is not the end of the journey. Leaving is often the
The
start,
beginning. Yes.
the
Yes.
start of a whole new journey. And that in itself is terrifying for so many survivors. And so the best thing you can do is be there for that person and listen to them and give them that support they need to start working towards leaving that abusive situation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving so much detail and depth around that. And you're right. So often we see people, oh, just leave, just leave, just leave, and it's not that easy. And it's also important to say that what you said there about leaving being the beginning. And this is what I want people to understand. So often I see people talk about leaving an abusive relationship, and within weeks they're in another relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're talking about, the beginning of the journey, is the journey of self. Because as you discovered, even though you left home, what you took with you was yourself, and you were a product of everything that you had learnt. And unbeknown to you, you were repeating a pattern to a degree of what you had seen, what you had experienced, and what you had been taught your value and worth was. And I just think it is so important that people understand that if you leave an abusive relationship, what is allowing it, just like you said with your story, you allow the way that people treat you, you
Mm-hmm.
know and when you show up differently, they show up differently too. You can create something else. So if you go into another relationship immediately without doing all that work on yourself, so that you show up as a different person with all these barriers and boundaries and values, everything about yourself in place, you just repeat a pattern. And this is how we end up with people saying, how have I had 3 narcissistic relationships?
Yep.
How is it that everyone I meet is an abuser? And you have to
Mm-hmm.
understand that the common denominator is you, and that what
Yep.
you are allowing, and this is I'm not victim shaming, you're allowing it
Mm-hmm.
because of what you've been taught to think about yourself, is actually creating this situation.
Oh,
And
that's such a key factor for people to understand. And I know
yeah,
that I was the same. I was asking the same questions.
I
Why
love
is
your
every
story.
guy abusive? And yeah, you do have to understand that it's important to look at what you are doing and how you are, what decisions are you making that are contributing to you continuing to attract these certain people. And I've said this many times before with my own story, that some people might call this victim blaming, and sure, they can go ahead and say that I'm internalizing victim blaming against myself. But I recognize that while I wasn't responsible for my sexual assault, I was continuing to put myself in dangerous situations and repeat unhealthy decisions over and over that were giving me the same result over and over, which was, gradually more and more unhealthy things that were happening in my life. there were a lot of red flags that were leading up to that sexual assault. That wasn't like that just came out of nowhere. Even with this person who was a friend of mine, there were things he had done previously to that that I now think that was such an erosion of personal boundaries, and that was so disrespectful. And yet I went back again
Mhm.
to hang out with that person again. And I wasn't responsible for what he did to me, but I had to recognize the part that I played in getting myself into that situation where that happened and was done to me. And I also had to recognize what I had to do to stop that pattern from repeating in the future. So,
Yeah, and I've done it exactly the same. I totally changed everything in my narcissistic marriage when I recognized that I was allowing this, and that I could either change. He would either change or leave when I changed what I was allowing, how I was showing up. That was a huge realization and a decision,
yeah,
and it totally changed everything when I changed myself and changed what I would allow.
yeah,
Absolutely. Just, and that's why your
100%.
story of when you were worried about being very firm about that boundary that seemed irrelevant, it's not for anyone else to say it's irrelevant. It was important to you.
Mm,
And look at the result that you got. That story is so powerful and just illustrates what happens when we are honest and when we express what we really need for ourselves. So
yeah,
thank you so much for everything you've shared so far. What I do want to ask you about is, obviously you got to this point. This is the important thing about the decision as well, where when we make that decision, as you say, we're not making a decision, so I'm not going to be the victim anymore, I'm
mhm,
not going to do that. We don't recognize that, but the decision is that this is going to change. I remember my own decision, and even with that decision was all the, well, I don't know how, I don't know what this looks like, I've no idea what to do, but I know that this has to change. And that's really all it is. And then we go on this long journey of self-discovery and healing and personal development, and it's a difficult but amazing, incredible journey. And I think once you move from healing, which is one thing, into growth, I mean, you get both as you go along, but when you're doing the healing, you're still coming from uncertainty and doubt and fear. And when you move into real love for yourself and love for life and other people, you start to create this real abundance. The personal growth still carries on, but it's like getting the pot at the end of the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So yeah, so it's important to understand there's a reason it's called work. We have to do the work, and it can be hard. So, but tell us a bit about your journey. What was it that helped you? What to make these changes and to see who you really were?
yeah. There's a couple of really key things. Firstly, I think one of the things that really helped me to get to where I am now, working as a writing coach, author of 2 books, mental health speaker, was to just throw myself into a lot of different experiences and do a lot of volunteer work. Because even after I came out the other side of that sexual assault and I went into a good relationship, I still didn't. I still wasn't thriving. I didn't know how to actually, create something meaningful in my future. And I don't think I really believed that it was possible either. I thought I would just stick with what was comfortable. I would stick with working in admin or, things like that were paying the bills, but they were not only were they not fulfilling, but they were kind of soul destroying for me because I had this real creative desire inside of me to do something really meaningful and something that would change lives. But I didn't know what that looked like. And I didn't really think that it was possible for me to actually achieve that. And that was a lot of the conditioning that I grew up with as well, with my dad and his abusive words.
Yeah.
Um, but volunteer work really helped to reroute my life and kind of show me what I was passionate about. So in around 2011, 2012, I spent some time volunteering at a really large sort of arts and cultural festival up in Toowoomba. And I was doing some work as a photojournalist and, discovering more about things I was passionate about. And that really led into me discovering that I love to hear stories and I love to help unearth these stories of everyday people who were doing really incredible things. And through that process, I found out that I was really passionate about social issues like, human trafficking and domestic violence, child abuse. And so I started to write on those issues, just blogging and, doing interviews with really interesting people who were working in these spaces. And over time, that sort of helped me to build, to develop my creative writing skills. I had, I'd already been to university. I'd graduated with a creative writing degree and a bachelor in creative writing and psychology. But for the last couple of years before that, I hadn't known what to actually do with that degree. So yeah, I just spent a lot of time volunteering with different organizations, helping to write content for them or finding really interesting people myself and interviewing them. And yeah, through the process, that was a big part of me going on to create my book series, which is called Reasons to Live One More Day Every Day. And that's essentially a collection of inspiring stories from around Australia and the world. And it just follows the stories of everyday and high profile people who found a way to transform their traumas and their adversities into purpose. And in the book, I talk about this journey too, and how volunteering was a key part of getting me out of, those victim mindsets. It was a key part of helping me to shift my focus to how I could actually help other people instead of focusing on what wasn't going right in my life or what I was failing at and how stupid I was and all of these things. And yeah, it also helped me discover what I was passionate about. And that led me really into the career that I'm in now. And I'd say another few key things that helped me were finding the right support person. So after my sexual assault, I had a very bad experience with a counselor I think it was a counselor at a hospital. So it was a free service and it put me off seeing a professional for years because it was so bad. And I didn't actually get professional support to work through my traumas until 2016, something like that, 2015, 2016. And finding the right person, someone who was actually, the perfect balance of being a professional expert who was also empathetic and listened to what I was going through and understood how traumatic the things were that I had gone through and was willing to let me talk about that in depth and help me create a plan to work through that. That was a huge part as well. That's another story on its own, but essentially this person helped me in only a couple of sessions to work through these PTSD symptoms that I'd been experiencing for a number of months that was basically like Pandora's box reopening after 10 years. I hadn't addressed the sexual assault. I just sort of went on with my life. And it wasn't until I started to do a lot of advocacy around domestic violence that I understood that I had actually been in an abusive relationship of sorts. I had never actually put that together.
Right.
So understanding that, and getting the right support helped me to actually move through that PTSD that I'd been having for months in only a couple of sessions. So that's a big indicator too of how rapidly you can work through trauma when you're actually working with the right person.
Right.
And I know that's something you understand very well.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that, because it's such an important and valid point that and this is one of my really big focuses and my passion at the moment, the mental health service worldwide. Like, my clients are worldwide. I see this with
Mhm.
the mental health service. It doesn't matter where someone comes from, that normally what is offered to support is woefully inadequate. And I can end up talking to someone who's been in therapy for maybe 10, even 40 years, and they have no idea that the person they needed to see all of this time, they really need someone who's trauma informed.
Yep.
And as you say, in the first couple of sessions, I'll tell them things about their experience, how it's affected them, why they are as they are, that no one has told them in all these years of therapy. And it incenses me that people are not being referred, that they just don't seem to be available, which is
Mhm.
really frustrating, because there's people like me that are available. They could employ me, you know. um and it's important, anyone listening, if you get referred for therapy, ask ask if your therapist is trauma informed. Ask them what work they've done around trauma. And I'm sorry, if you're on the state system, you might be stuck with what you get, but at least you will know. You will know, is this person qualified to help me with this? You know, what work have they already done with people? What were the results that they got? And yeah, it is woeful, it's
Mhm.
pitiful, and it's unnecessary. So
Yep.
I would get on a soapbox about this, so we better stop, because yeah.
Yeah. It's so true though, and it holds so many people back. I mean, even in
Does.
my work with writing coaching, I'll have people come to me who, for them, sharing their story is a huge part of the healing process. And one of my clients, she has survived things, and I won't go into
No.
detail about, but she survived things that a lot of people would say are impossible to ever come out the other side of, you know, like awful, awful child sexual abuse that happened from, the time that she was basically born until she was in her mid teens, that's a long time to survive something that traumatic. And she's been through so much self work. She has done some really incredible things in her life to work out how to actually, reprogram her nervous system and um, reverse, some of these lifelong effects of this trauma. She still, of course, lives with a lot of that trauma that's manifested in different physical ways. But even with all the work that she'd done, which included, spending many, many years in a Buddhist monastery, and yeah, she's got a fascinating story. When we finished working on her story and telling her story of, going through these issues and coming out the other side, and how she's been able to create a business and a life that she truly loves and adores, even then she still said to me, this process of working in tandem with you and your writing course, and doing that in tandem with the work that I do with my psychotherapist, has given me like a brand new lease on life. And she said, I am, you know, rebuilding self-esteem that has basically been in tatters for years. And for the first time in a long time, I feel that I'm, yeah, rebuilding connections with the world and coming back out into the world and creating, I can't remember the word she said, but basically, um yeah, doing this writing, going through the process of doing writing coaching and sharing her story was so transformative in her feeling like she was re-emerging out into the world and able to, reconnect with people that she had lost contact with for decades, family members, that she had been isolated from because of the things that happened in her childhood. And just feeling for the first time that she could actually go out into the world and go for a lot of these dreams that she'd been thinking of for so long but hadn't been able to achieve. And I think that's a really special story that shows that even with all the work that we can put in, there's something really healing that comes, number one, from working with the right professional, and also from learning how to own your story, truly embody it, and then share it to help others. So through the process of, you know, us working together and her writing and publishing her story, she's been able to share such an intimate part of her life that once held so much shame with, you know, people that are now very close to her, and they're able to understand her so much more deeply and go, wow, like this makes me, you know, I'm in even more awe of you now, because to know everything that you went through and see the strong and like most of all peaceful person that you are now, the sort of person that's filled with peace and finds gratitude in every little thing and isn't living their life in fear and anxiety and in these victim blaming patterns, is just extraordinary. And so yeah, it's wonderful to see how, you know, therapy in tandem with writing and sharing our stories can be so transformative in the lives of people who have had trauma for so long and haven't been able to find the right person to help them work through that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think that just gives people hope, because so often there's so many people and they have tried so many things and it's not the right thing, it's not the right therapy,
Mhm.
it's not the right person, and they lose hope and they think I will never get over this, this is my life. So thank you for sharing that that doesn't have to be the
Yeah.
case. And yeah, in your work, in my work, we do meet people and we help people overcome incredible adversity, and it is amazing the people that they can go on to become, and what they achieve. But you touched on gratitude there, and it leads very, very nicely into something that I know is very important to you. It's important to me. But talk about gratitude and the importance of it in the
Mm.
healing process.
Well, gratitude journaling, I mean, a lot of people look at it, some people look at it as a bit of a, you know, arty farty sort of thing. They're like, oh yeah, gratitude journaling, what could that do for me? And I think when I was younger, I might have thought the same way, but it's something that I've found has really, really helped me. And I know it helps, you know, millions of other people as well through the healing journey, just in terms of, you know, shifting our focus and the way that we're actually looking at things. I mean, if you want to look at it scientifically, the research has actually shown that gratitude and gratitude journaling exercises are incredible in terms of, you know, opening the doors to more healthy relationships, helping us to decrease stress and anxiety and depression. There's even been studies around how effective gratitude journaling has been in terms of assisting with things like PTSD. So scientifically, you know, we know that it works. But I think for me, when I started using it, I was in my mid-20s and I was going through a real slump. I'd come out of, you know, a really long-term relationship and I didn't know where I was heading in life. And I was always focusing on everything that was going wrong. And I was getting back into that victim mindset. And so I just started every night, you know, for 5 minutes before bed, writing down at least 5 things that I was grateful for. And it's something that I've kind of modified over time. So now I try to write a mixture of things, you know, both internal and external things that I'm grateful for. So I try to write things externally in my world that I'm grateful for. So I'm just grateful that I have a house, you know, a roof over my head, that I still have a job, that my husband still has a job right now. I'm really grateful that we have food on the table and we're able to buy what we need. But I also try to remember to be grateful for, you know, just internal qualities about myself as well. You know, I'm grateful that I'm an empathetic person, because that is, I used to see my sensitivity and my empathy as a real flaw. I would always go, "You're too sensitive, Jazz, toughen up. You shouldn't be so sensitive about this thing that this person said." But in more recent years, I've discovered that having that sensitivity and that empathy has brought a really wonderful mix of people into my life. And it's kind of been one of the key elements to my business being so successful, because a lot of the people that I work with are trauma survivors. And the reason that they decide to work with me as a writing coach to share their story over, all the other, over many other writing coaches they may have seen out there, is because I have the lived experience of coming through trauma, and I understand the barriers that hold people back. And so when I do my gratitude practices, I try to be grateful for things about myself that maybe I would usually see as a flaw, as well as things going on in my world. And it is really incredible to see how just setting aside those 5 minutes, maybe for you it's the start of the day. For me, I find it's easier to do it at the end of the day. It can really, it can help with better sleep, decrease stress, and just attracting more of the positive sort of people and experiences into our life that we want. And very quickly I saw this play out when I first started to do this journaling practice when I was about 25. I started to see really positive people suddenly appearing in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say to me, you've got such a great attitude about this. This thing's not going right in your life. It's not working out. But I really love how positive you are about things, and that even though you're upset about what hasn't worked out, you're able to look at the positives in the situation. And I just started to get less of those, just people in my life that were sucking me of energy, those energy vampires. And I started to attract people that were just really bright and bubbly and doing really cool things with in the world. And it's interesting. Like, I really encourage people to set aside just 5 minutes a day, every day, to write a list of at least 5 things you're grateful for. Do it for a couple of weeks, and I challenge you to see, I challenge you to come back and say that it didn't work, because
Oh,
I've seen how powerful it is.
I absolutely, it's something I encourage all of my clients to do. I do encourage them to journal what they're seeing and experiencing, so we can look at the patterns that we need to heal. But this focus on gratitude is absolutely amazing, because what you're doing, you're shifting from the negative to the positive. And as you said, it totally changes not only how you feel inside, but how you show up as a person. I mean, it was and it can be really simple things. So just a couple of weeks ago, I fell over in the garden. I broke this part of my hand. It's now in a splint. And I remember lying there, and like I fell backwards over a log, and I remember lying there, and I was lying there, and I thought, okay, so I know my hand hurts, but the rest of me feels okay. I started to get myself out. I went, okay, the ground could have been harder than it was. I didn't fall on the concrete. At least it's not wet. And then my big dog comes bounding over and said, okay, at least I've got a big dog to love me and help me while I sit here and cry,
Yep.
And then I went, and then I realized I was wearing a very expensive cream jumper that I love. And I checked it. And
no.
at least I haven't damaged my jumper, And as I got up, I went, okay, so I've definitely hurt my hand, but it could have been so much worse. And again, it was just these half a dozen things, and I was immediately, because of the practice of doing this, I was immediately drawn to all the things that were so much better about this than they could have been.
And I think it's important for people to know that it's okay to be upset when things don't go wrong, and it's okay to wallow. And like, even if you'd sat there and had a big cry and gone,
I did cry. I was crying. I was crying.
Even if you'd sat there all day and been like, this is shit. My life sucks. I can't believe I ruined this jumper. Even if you'd written that day off as a bad day, that's okay. It's just important to stay in that bad day and that depressive mindset for the next, days and weeks. But yeah, it is good to like have perspective, but to also allow yourself to feel what you're feeling and then look at, all right, tomorrow's a new day. How can I move forward today? Or, okay, my hand's going to be in a, in your case, my hand's going to be in a...
it was in plaster. It was in plaster for a couple of weeks, yeah. So it was...
And you're like, all right, well, this is going to be maybe a really challenging couple of weeks. And yeah, things are not going to be as smooth. But I've just got to get through this period because there's a lot of other good things happening. And trying not to focus everything on how bad something's going. So.
Yeah. And it's amazing how when you do practice this, your mind learns by repetition, know, and when this is your habit, it's just your habit. It's just what you go to, so anyway. So just stories to illustrate the power of stories. So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you. You've shared so many amazing insights, and obviously we'll put all of your contact details in the show notes. But if people want to contact you, if people are interested in this power of telling their story, which I do highly recommend to anyone, having done it myself and found it so amazing for my own healing. So how would people get hold of you? What's the best way?
Just jump on my website. It's jazrawlinson.com. Just Google my name, Jaz Rawlinson.
Not J-A-Z.
Jas.
Yeah.
Jazrawlinson.com. And you can just contact me through there. And we can... I'm always really excited to talk to people about their stories. So if, I'd just like to say, if you have a story that's burning inside of you and you really want to get that out and use it to, actually create meaning and change lives and inspire people or maybe grow your business, then I'd love to chat to anyone who's got that same passion. And just jump on my website and we can go from there.
Oh, thank you so much for everything you shared. I'm not sure if there's anything left because, as I say, we've talked about so much. But do you have any kind of parting words, any words of wisdom to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I was just thinking, actually, there's a quote that I shared in an interview I did recently with Authority magazine, and they were asking me about, what sort of advice I would give to people. What's something really powerful that I want to share with people who, have been through adversity and are not sure what to do with their lives. And one of the things that I say a lot, and it's a little bit controversial, but I truly do believe that trauma does not have to be a life sentence.
Oh, no, it doesn't. No.
I truly believe that, our traumas can actually redefine us and that we can learn how to use them to help other people and create something meaningful and create something with purpose. And I just want to encourage you, if you have those beliefs about yourself or your traumas, it doesn't mean that what you've been through was not traumatic and that what happened to you, that you don't have a right to feel upset about what happened. It doesn't even mean that you can't still feel upset or that you don't still have triggers or struggle with things that are lasting impacts from that trauma. But I do believe that you can redefine that trauma and the role it plays in your life instead of letting it define you. And so I'd like to challenge you to look at how you can use your trauma to change maybe your life in a positive way or create change in the lives of other people. I'd really like to challenge you to look at the good that you can use this experience for, instead of looking at it as something that has damaged you and is going to hold you back.
Oh, thank you so much. And yes, I know sometimes it can be seen as controversial. But of course, scientifically, we know that the body and mind can heal.
Hmm.
And you and I, we're only here saying and doing what thousands before us have already done.
Yep.
Let's look at the people who have healed and created something rather than those that haven't as the inspiration for what's
For
possible.
what's possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so and that's why we're here. That's why we have the
Absolutely.
podcast. That's why
Yeah.
everyone's sharing their stories because that's all we want to do. That's what we want to be for people. So thank you for being here, sharing your story, and yeah, just just being such an inspiration to
Well,
other
thank
people.
you. Thanks. And thank you for everything you're doing as well. And thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all my guests and their courage and just their honesty and openness. And I know that it from the messages I get about the podcasts, I know what an incredible difference it makes to other people. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.